The soaring glass facade of the Summit Motors showroom on Madison Avenue reflected the silvery gray light of an early winter morning, just enough to give the interior a sense of cold luxury. Ethan Walker, 52, walked slowly toward the main entrance, his left hand resting on the black carbon cane that had been with him for more than 3 decades. He wore a simple gray wool coat with the collar pulled up to hide part of his lean face, paired with jeans frayed at the hem. No one in this place knew that the man with the uneven gait was the very founder of the brand they proudly wore on their uniforms. The gentle tap of his cane against the stone floor marked a steady rhythm, echoing through the lobby like a polite greeting that no one returned. As soon as he stepped onto the reception mat, a young female receptionist's voice rose, polite yet carefully distant. "I'm sorry, sir, to view the Aurora GT, you'll need to book an appointment in advance." Ethan stopped, his gaze passing over the young woman's narrow shoulders toward the back of the room, where the Aurora GT rested under a pure white spotlight, its sleek metallic lines carved like the pride of an entire design team. He hadn't yet replied when the door behind him opened, bringing in the soft laughter and faint perfume of a well-dressed couple. Instantly, a male staff member in a dark suit approached, bowing slightly as he offered them glasses of chilled white wine on a silver tray. "So glad to see you again, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison. We've prepared the VIP room and your private viewing schedule," he said, his smile perfected by hundreds of luxury client greetings. Ethan simply watched in silence. No one asked his name, no one offered him a brochure as they should have to any guest. He gave a small nod, turned away, and the sound of his cane rang out again, deep and deliberate. Outside, the glass reflected his figure merging with the silver Summit Motors logo, like a faded memory shrouded in the dust of time. In that moment, another image rose in his mind, one from 31 years earlier when Ethan was 21. On a sweltering afternoon in a rented garage on the outskirts of New Jersey, he bent over the chassis of his first prototype, sweat mixing with engine grease that coated his hands and collar. The test engine roared to life, then exploded with a sharp crack, the lift frame snapping and sending the steel mass crashing down, trapping his right leg against the cold concrete floor. The smell of gasoline filled his nose, suffocating. In the haze of shock, he told himself, "Don't pass out, don't give up here." Weeks later, when the doctor confirmed he would live with a prosthetic leg for the rest of his life, Ethan voiced no complaint, carrying instead a new resolve to create a machine the world would have to notice, not for its glamour, but for its meaning. Recovery was a long battle, not only with physical pain, but with the sense of betrayal from his own body. Every step on the prosthetic was a test. While others might have aimed simply to return to normal life, he sketched hundreds of designs, studying technical drawings as if they were sacred texts. When he left the hospital, Ethan carried not just a cane, but a plan to build Summit Motors, starting with an old laptop in a corner of a rented garage, welding frames together from bolts borrowed here and there. The first prototype wasn't built to impress, but to prove a philosophy. Cars don't ask who you are, how much money you have, or the color of your skin. Only people build those barriers. That belief fueled the brand, turning it into the choice of those who dared to dream and had the resolve to follow their own road. Now standing outside the Manhattan showroom, once the symbol of that vision, Ethan felt the creeping distortion taking hold. Summit Motors was never meant to serve only a chosen class, but to stand with those who endured, saved every penny, and spent years to finally place their hands on the wheel. And to be turned away for not having an appointment in his own house was a sign that someone was twisting the spirit he had spent half a lifetime to build. The memory of the glass door closing behind him still lingered, but on the way home, Ethan knew he couldn't stop at just feeling unsettled. That afternoon, in his office lined with photos of prototype cars and technical drawings, he opened the envelope that had sat on his desk for over a week. The paper was thick, the handwriting firm, with no return address, only the name, Alexander Brooks. The opening line was slow yet resolute. "I am a former Navy pilot, once proud to wear the uniform in service of this country. Last week I walked into the Summit Motors showroom in Manhattan ready to fulfill a dream. I wore my dress uniform and asked to see the Aurora GT. They told me it was sold out. I saw it right behind them. No handshake, no one asked my name. I left in silence, and only then did I realize how invisible I had become. Ethan read it once, then twice more. The words were plain, but their weight lay in the space between the lines, in the place where pride had been left behind, where the memories of service and sacrifice had been replaced by a cold glance. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting over the framed photos on the wall. The launch of the first model, a picture of him shaking hands with everyday customers in a parking lot, the smiles of people buying the car they had saved for all their lives. Now, in that very space, echoed the voice of someone who felt shut out. This was not the first complaint Ethan had received, but it was one he could not set aside. It didn't just point to a lapse in customer service. It revealed a crack running deep into the very foundation of values on which Summit Motors had grown. The problem was not the car or the man who wrote the letter. The problem was that people privileged to wear the company uniform had forgotten what the logo over their hearts once stood for. Ethan folded the letter and set it gently on the desk, as if preserving an important reminder. He no longer felt a flash of anger, but rather a quiet clarity. If the system had truly drifted off course, he needed to see it with his own eyes, not through reports, not through filtered accounts. He pressed the intercom button, his voice low and deliberate. "Daniel, book me a flight to New York. No meetings, no advance notice, no press, and don't let anyone on the team know." Daniel hesitated before asking, "What do you plan to do there?" Ethan looked up, meeting the eyes of the assistant who had been with him for more than 10 years. "I want to see the Manhattan showroom as an ordinary customer." A short silence between them was enough to confirm that this was not just a business trip. It was a test. Not to check sales numbers, but to take the measure of the brand's heart. The next day, amid the crowd on the busy sidewalks of Madison Avenue, Ethan blended into the stream of people like a shadow. No tailored suit, no silk tie, no sign that he owned the gleaming glass building ahead. Just a pale plaid shirt, simple khaki pants, and his familiar carbon cane, his gait now so practiced it was barely noticeable. As the automatic doors opened, a cool draft from the air conditioning met him, carrying the scent of new leather and walnut from the showroom's interior. A security guard at the door glanced at him and looked away without a greeting. At the reception desk ahead, a young man hunched over a computer screen, fingers tapping quickly, looking up only for a fleeting moment as Ethan approached, offering a perfunctory nod before returning to his task. No one asked if he needed assistance. No one offered water or an introduction to the products. Ethan stood still, letting the silence speak for itself, letting the void in their manner confirm what he had feared. Without the look of a potential customer, he was nothing more than a stray figure in a space built to showcase success. Ethan left the reception desk without a word and walked straight toward the Aurora GT display, the centerpiece of the showroom. The car sat on a slow-turning platform, its silver metallic paint catching every beam of light from the ceiling, the aerodynamic lines wrapping tightly around its body like a piece of sculpture. He approached slowly, his hand brushing lightly against the red velvet rope that marked the boundary. A female voice sounded from behind, cool but wrapped in a polite smile. "I'm sorry, the flagship area is reserved for customers with scheduled appointments." Ethan turned. The woman, dressed in a perfectly tailored black blazer, her hair neatly tied back, let her eyes sweep over him from head to toe before keeping that same poised smile. "We truly appreciate your interest, but the policy here is quite strict. If you'd like, I can help you set an appointment for next week." He gave a slight nod, neither objecting nor attempting to explain. As he stepped away from the platform, his gaze passed over the car once more, not out of curiosity for the product, for he knew every curve and every seam by heart, but because of the unspoken message he had just been given. He did not belong inside the space beyond that velvet rope. Out on the sidewalk, the midday sun reflected off the glass like a giant mirror. A silver SUV pulled up abruptly, braking hard at the curb. A man in his 30s, wearing an expensive watch and still talking on the phone, glanced briefly at Ethan before tossing him a set of keys. "Hold this for me, will you?" Without waiting for a reply, the man strode inside, his voice continuing in the call. Ethan held the keys, the cold metal seeping into his skin. The foreign brand logo gleamed on the fob, a symbol of a quiet prejudice. A man with a cane, dressed simply, could only be a valet. This assumption wasn't because of the cane, nor because of his silence, but because his outward appearance didn't match their definition of a worthy customer. From outside, Ethan looked through the glass at the Aurora GT. He knew every air intake, every cut in the hood, the distinctive stitching pattern on the leather seats, all born from nights spent at his design table. Yet today, under perfect display lighting, he was not allowed to touch it. His reflection blurred on the glass, turning the founder into a stranger standing outside the game. A stylish young couple walked in. Two staff members approached instantly, smiles broader, posture straighter. "So glad to see you again, Mr. and Mrs. Langford. We have the keys ready for you to test drive today." Champagne trays appeared, the velvet rope pulled back like a ritual reserved for the elite. Just a few meters away, Ethan remained invisible, uninvited, unasked. Moments later, an Asian man in his 30s entered, his eyes lingering on the Aurora GT with admiration. A staff member approached, asked a perfunctory question, then deftly steered him toward the mid-range section, offering a smooth explanation that those models were a better fit and still provided a similar experience. Ethan watched each movement. There was no open rudeness, only velvet-covered suggestions polite enough not to be called offensive, yet clear enough to drive home a single point. "You shouldn't want that one." He stepped back toward the waiting area, chose a single chair, and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. The pen moved slowly, recording every detail: who was welcomed, who was ignored, who was offered a drink, who wasn't. He let no anger show on his face, focusing only on observing. In those lines, each slice of bias was preserved not as a vague impression, but as a precise map of the truth he had come to find. As he was turning to a new page, the pen not yet touching paper, Ethan heard the soft hiss of the automatic doors opening. A middle-aged woman stepped inside, her pace slow but assured. Warm brown skin, silver-streaked hair neatly pinned back, a dove-gray wool coat, and low heels. She moved without hurry, without hesitation, her eyes sweeping the space before resting for a long moment on the Aurora GT, her lips parting slightly as if to swallow a quiet rush of emotion. She approached the reception desk, hands loosely clasped in front of her, waiting patiently. Two sales associates passed by. One glanced at her, the other did not even look. No one approached. No one spoke. She shifted her weight, adjusted the strap of her handbag, and continued to wait. Minutes passed. The light in her eyes dimmed, her shoulders sinking slightly. Then, as if she already knew the answer before hearing it, she turned, her heels tapping a steady rhythm on the polished stone floor as she left the showroom in silence. No farewell, no parting glance, as if she had never been there at all. Ethan's gaze followed each of her steps, his expression still. The glass doors closed, reflecting her figure as it merged into the crowd outside until she vanished completely. At the reception desk, Isabella Torres, a young woman with deep brown hair, simply dressed in a white blouse, still held her tablet in hand, but her eyes were not on the screen. She had been watching that woman, noting the quiet dignity in her bearing, the way she carried herself like someone long accustomed to being overlooked. The feeling was not unfamiliar to Isabella. It was not fluster or anger, but the silent loosening of the grip on a hope she had held only moments before. A man's voice cut through her thoughts. Richard Collins, the showroom manager, a folder tucked under his arm, spoke briskly. "Isabella, follow up with the Langfords. They need more information about the Aurora GT." She answered quickly, "Yes, I'll do that right away." But as she turned, her eyes drifted once more to the now empty glass doors. The absence of the woman left a weight in the air that Isabella knew she would carry longer than she wished. Returning to the reception desk, Isabella set the tablet down, her fingertips tapping lightly on the counter. Ethan stepped forward. No name tag, no gesture to reveal who he was. She looked up, her expression cautious but polite. "How can I help you?" He didn't smile. He studied her for a few seconds, not in judgment but as if confirming something. "I think," he said quietly, "you're wondering what the right thing to do is." She froze, saying nothing. "And I also think," he continued, "you already know the answer. You're just waiting for someone else to say it first." Isabella looked away, avoiding his eyes. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and drew out a plain business card, no logo, just the name E. Walker and a phone number. He slid it toward her. "If that day comes, you can call me." With that, he turned and walked away without waiting for a question. Isabella looked at the card in her hand, her thumb tracing its edge, hesitating. She lifted her head to call out, but he was already a few steps away, only turning back to say, his voice low but clear, "When you're ready to say what needs to be said, I'll be here to listen." The automatic doors opened, then closed behind him. In Isabella's jacket pocket, the card felt strangely heavy, not from its weight, but from what it implied. For the first time in many months, she felt she was not entirely invisible, and when someone begins to be seen, silence can't last forever. The late afternoon sky over New York settled into a pale gray, streetlights beginning to spill their glow onto the rain-slick pavement. Across the street, Ethan stood watching the brightly lit showroom, glowing like an emotionless display box. In his jacket pocket, Alexander Brooks's letter and the image of the middle-aged woman who had just walked out overlapped in his mind like two pieces of the same puzzle. He knew he had enough to be certain of what was happening, but evidence required more than impressions or memory. He needed everything to be revealed in the light, undeniable. The next morning, in the short-term midtown apartment he had rented, Ethan called Daniel. His voice was calm but decisive. "I want to run a test. Small, quiet, but exact." On the other end, Daniel paused for a few seconds before asking, "What kind of test?" 3 people. Different profiles, different backgrounds, but with the same goal. Walk into that showroom and ask about the Aurora GT. I want every second recorded, every word. No one can know we're behind it. When Daniel stayed silent, Ethan added, his voice dropping lower, "And make sure none of them look like me." He hung up, set the phone on the table, his gaze fixed on the window where streams of traffic crawled between blaring horns and amber lights. On the day of the test, the air inside the temporary control room set up in a rented apartment near the showroom was tight as a drawn wire. Daniel sat before a bank of monitors split into 3 parallel feeds, each showing a customer stepping through the glass doors at the same moment. Ethan sat beside him, leaning slightly forward, eyes fixed so intently it seemed he didn't blink. Frame 1, a white man, around 35, in a tailored navy suit, burgundy silk tie, a gleaming white gold watch at his wrist. 2 sales associates approached him immediately, smiles broad, one extending a hand for a shake, the other nodding in greeting as if welcoming back a familiar guest. "Looking for something truly special today, sir?" When he pointed to the Aurora GT, they wasted no time unhooking the red velvet rope, inviting him onto the display platform. A manager appeared, Richard Collins himself, to personally present it. "We rarely open this model for new clients, but you look like the right fit." A glass of champagne materialized. The engine was started so he could hear the sound. Ethan said nothing, simply watched as Daniel froze the frame. Frame 2, a black woman, about 48, wearing a deep blue blazer and slacks, carrying a document case. She entered, her eyes going straight to the Aurora GT, yet no one approached until a passing salesperson stopped, clipboard in hand. "Hello, ma'am. Which financing package are you interested in?" "I'd like to know more about that model," she said, pointing to the Aurora GT. He didn't glance at the car, only asked, "Could you tell me your approximate credit score so I can recommend something more suitable?" She stood silent for a few seconds, then quietly replied, "You haven't asked my name." Without waiting for a response, she stepped back, her voice lowering. "Never mind, I think I understand." Then she walked away. Frame 3. An Asian man, around 28, white dress shirt tucked in, slim tie, polished brown shoes. He stopped in front of the Aurora GT, studying its details closely. A salesperson approached, exchanged a few words, then pivoted. "I think we have some grand touring models that would suit you perfectly, more affordable, but still a great driving experience." When he insisted on the Aurora GT, the smile stayed, but the tone closed off. "Let's start with something more realistic." He hesitated, then followed. The 3 frames kept rolling in parallel, but the story was already clear. No open insults, no overt actions, just invisible doors that opened for some and closed for others. Ethan sat still, his hand gripping the cane so tightly his knuckles turned white. It wasn't an outburst of anger, but a heavy, pressing weight on his chest like a stone, the weight of a truth now recorded, impossible to deny. Daniel let the footage keep rolling, but Ethan no longer needed more proof. He leaned forward, signaling to freeze the frame where Richard Collins was bending toward the white male customer, handing him the exclusive fob like a discreet token. Even without audio, Richard's posture made it clear it was an invitation for a private test drive. No paperwork, no formalities. That still image lingered on the monitor for several seconds, perfectly framing the core of the problem. This was not coincidence. It was a pattern, practiced, accepted, and even encouraged. Ethan rose to his feet, the tip of his cane tapping lightly against the hardwood floor, his eyes never leaving the frame. "That's enough," he said, his voice low but decisive. From his notebook, he pulled out a page worn at the edges, wrote a few quick lines, folded it, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "This isn't just individual bias. This is culture, and it's our culture." He turned to Daniel, his gaze unwavering. "Set a meeting with the full board of directors, as soon as possible." Daniel hesitated. "You know this won't go smoothly. They'll push back." Ethan replied immediately, his voice steady yet edged with a cold resolve. "Good. It shouldn't go smoothly. It's time someone remembered who built this company and why." He lifted his cane and walked toward the window. The city stretched out below, buildings threaded with yellow and white light, like a massive chessboard where he was about to move the most critical pieces. Less than 48 hours later, the first leaks began to spread, not from Ethan, but from Richard himself. Internal channels and investor forums passed around a deliberately vague headline: "Founder Intervention Disrupts Internal Stability at Summit Motors." The line was paired with insinuations that Ethan was exploiting his position to purge the leadership team under the guise of reform. In private calls with certain board members, Richard spoke in a low, concerned tone. "I respect Ethan's legacy, but legacy isn't an excuse for chaos. We need stability, not retaliation." In his office, Ethan watched the headlines multiply on his screen. Summit Motors fractures, Ethan Walker, reform or revenge. The phone rang constantly. Journalists, partners, even longtime shareholders who once stood firmly behind him now sent terse messages. "Should we postpone next quarter's launch? Are you planning to resign?" The atmosphere was shifting, support thinning into doubt. Daniel stepped in, holding a tablet. "You should see this." On the screen was a poll from a major investment blog. "Do you still trust Ethan Walker to lead Summit Motors?" The comments beneath were starkly divided, some defending him fiercely, others offering cold dismissals. A founder can outlive his own vision. In his inbox, a new email appeared with the subject line: "Response to Manhattan Showroom Audit Proposal." The message was brief. "The board has decided not to proceed with the restructuring you proposed. We respect your passion, but at this time our priority is stability." No invitation for discussion, no space for rebuttal, just a cold, final period. Ethan closed the laptop, his fingers resting on the lid longer than necessary. He didn't curse, didn't slam the desk. He simply leaned back and looked at the ceiling as though searching for an exit in a sealed maze. They had seen everything: the footage, the data, the customer stories, and still chose silence. They hadn't chosen Richard, they had chosen the comfort of quiet, and that meant he was now, officially, on his own. Ethan stood by the window, both hands buried deep in his pockets, his breath fogging faintly against the cold glass. Outside, the city moved on as if unaware of the struggle unfolding behind these walls of glass. People passed each other on the street, talking, laughing, not a single glance cast upward. No one recognized the man who had once changed the way they looked at cars, and who was now being pushed aside from the very road he had paved. Summit Motors, to Ethan, had never been just a brand. It was his voice expressed in metal and motion, the way he told the story of ordinary people daring to dream big. Now that voice felt strangled, reduced to a distant echo, replaced by a polished and safe facade. In the dim reflection on the glass, he saw himself but barely recognized the man staring back. Not because of age or time, but because he had once believed that if he built something for everyone, people would protect it. In reality, they had chosen to protect a version that was easier to swallow, neat, luxurious, and silent. Across the city, Isabella Torres sat in the employee break room, her shift long over, yet she hadn't left. The fluorescent light above buzzed faintly. Laughter echoed from the far end of the hallway, but she paid no attention. On the table, her phone screen glowed, displaying a single contact, E. Walker. Her chest rose and fell faster than usual, her thumb trembling slightly over the call button. All day, the same images had replayed in her mind. The face of the middle-aged woman leaving the showroom with disappointment in her eyes, unanswered questions hanging in the air, glances that dismissed someone's existence entirely. She had stayed silent long enough, allowing herself to become part of that numb routine. Now, there were only two choices left: remain still or step out of her comfort zone. The ringing began. 1 ring, 2, 3. Then Ethan's deep, slightly hoarse voice came through. "Hello." Isabella drew a deep breath. "This is Isabella. I'm ready." The words left her lips faster than she could think, but the moment they were spoken, she knew she wouldn't take them back. "I can't pretend anymore," she continued, her voice growing steadier. "Every time I smile at people who aren't welcomed here and let them walk away as if they were never here, I feel like I'm burying the company I once believed in. I've seen too much, stayed silent too long. Now it's enough. I'm ready to speak, no matter the cost." Ethan didn't interrupt. He let the silence settle, letting her finish. "They think we're weak because we're quiet," she said softly, almost like a confession. Ethan nodded, knowing she couldn't see it. "Then we make noise." Moments later, his inbox chimed with a new message. "For your eyes only, Isabella Torres." No greeting, no explanation, just one line. "This is what you've been looking for." The attachment was an internal PDF, customer filtering guidelines, situational procedure. The language was polished, rich with brand tone, but its meaning was cold. If a customer's appearance, manner, or way of speaking did not align with the brand image, they were to be steered toward lower-tier products. A process chart laid it out plainly: observe attire, scan posture, assess voice, and if it didn't match, redirect immediately. Ethan read every line slowly, his gaze sharpening with each word. This was no longer a feeling or a suspicion. This was policy, written, approved, and passed down as an official order. And now, it was in his hands. The press room the next morning was packed, camera flashes firing relentlessly, microphones aimed directly at the simple wooden podium in the center. There was no LED screen, no branded backdrop, only Ethan, standing straight with one hand resting lightly on the handle of his cane. His eyes swept over the front rows where reporters, shareholders, and employees were crowded together, before his deep, steady voice carried through the room. 2 weeks ago, I walked into one of our flagship showrooms just as an ordinary customer. He paused, letting the silence expand, drawing every gaze toward him. No one greeted me. No one asked what I needed. But someone did ask me to watch their car for them. The faint murmurs in the room faded into tense stillness. I was not shown a single product. In fact, I was denied access to my own design. And that is the problem. Ethan lifted a printed document from Isabella's email, the cover page clearly showing the title, Customer Filtering Guidelines, Situational Procedure. This was not random. This is policy. Quiet, subtle, but ruthless. And it exists within the very system we call our standard. The entire room fell silent, as if the words on that page had just shattered a long-held illusion. The news erupted almost instantly. Excerpts from the speech spread across platforms, online headlines striking hard. Summit Motors founder exposes internal customer discrimination policy. Shocking scandal. Showroom filters clients by appearance and manner. Inside the company's headquarters, the undercurrent turned into a flood. Richard Collins slammed his office door, the hinges ringing sharp in the taut air. His face flushed, not from shame, but from rage. Call the lawyers and dig up everything we have on Ethan. I want him discredited before the sun sets, he ordered, his voice clipped and hard. This was no longer about protecting the brand. It was now a fight for personal survival. The next day, the boardroom sat under the cold glow of white lights. 12 chairs were arranged around a long wooden table, every eye fixed on Ethan as he planted his cane on the floor and pulled out a seat. Without opening with a speech, he placed a tablet on the table and tapped play. First came the footage of the white customer. Warm smiles, velvet ropes unhooked, champagne glasses sparkling. Next, the footage of the black customer, an immediate question about credit score, scrutinizing eyes, a polite but firm redirection. Finally, the screen displayed the process chart from Isabella's document. Ethan looked up. This is not my opinion. This is the company's practice. He pushed the tablet toward them, his voice firm and unyielding. You don't need to believe me. Just read your own policy. The room remained utterly still. No one in the room spoke. The silence now was no longer resistance, but felt more like a quiet admission. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn envelope, the paper edges frayed as if it had been handled many times. He opened it and read, his voice deep and steady but resolute. Dear Mr. Walker, I spent 3 years saving to buy my dream car, a Summit. I walked into the Manhattan showroom, proud and nervous at the same time. But in the 20 minutes I stood there, not one person spoke to me. When I asked about the Aurora GT, the staff just smiled and told me it wasn't for me. I left feeling humiliated. I haven't bought another car since, but I'm writing this letter because I believe this brand deserves better than the way it's being represented under your name. Ethan folded the letter slowly, his eyes sweeping across each face around the table. This letter was sent 2 years ago. It was never answered. Today, we answer it. The chairman adjusted his glasses, his voice low. We will put it to a vote. Motion to immediately remove Regional Director Richard Collins for gross violation of ethical and governance standards. There was no debate, only the sound of pens signing and short responses. Yes. Yes. Abstain. No. Then yes again. When the final vote was recorded, the result was clear. 11 in favor, 3 against, 1 abstention. Richard sat motionless at the far end of the table, the corner of his mouth parting as if to speak, but there were no words left to cling to. The chairman looked him squarely in the eye. Effective immediately. Richard rose to his feet, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. No handshake, no apology, only the heavy sound of his footsteps striking the wooden walls, and then the door closing behind him. No one in the room spoke. Justice, this time, was not loud. It was simply carried out. A week later, the Manhattan showroom wore a new look, not in its paint or signage, but in the way it breathed. The reception desk no longer offered smiles tailored to fit certain types of customers, but simple, genuine greetings. Champagne was no longer reserved for a select few. replaced instead by cups of hot coffee offered to anyone who walked through the door. At the center of the display floor, Maria Torres, now the Director of Compliance and Diverse Customer Outreach, stood with a clipboard in hand, a headset over her ear, her demeanor calm yet decisive. She moved slowly through each section, stopping to greet a teenage girl in sneakers, a black couple whose eyes still held some caution, a middle-aged man in a worn work jacket. Each person was invited to tour the showroom, to sit, and was addressed by name. The Aurora GT was still there, behind its clear glass, only now there was no red velvet rope, no invisible barrier. When a visitor wanted to step onto the platform, it was Maria who opened the door, handed them the key so they could settle into the driver's seat, feel the wheel in their hands, and hear the low growl of the engine under the accelerator. From the mezzanine, Ethan leaned against the railing, quietly observing. He didn't intervene, nor did he try to be the center of attention. His vision was in motion, no longer just an idea on paper, but a principle living in every handshake and every exchange of eye contact. In the late afternoon, he stepped out onto the rooftop, where the wind from the Hudson River blew cold. The city below still blazed with light, streams of headlights stretching into golden and red ribbons. Ethan didn't look at the skyline, but through it. "No one," he said softly, "should be pushed aside just because of how they walk through the door, if inside them they still carry a dream." He closed his eyes for a few seconds, letting the words settle, then turned back, walking slowly toward the stairs. There was no speech, no camera lens, only a man who had built something, and this time rebuilt it from within. From the perspective of someone who has witnessed hundreds of brands, big and small, go through the full cycle of rise and decline, I believe the most enduring vitality of any organization does not lie in sales figures or dazzling advertising campaigns, but in its ability to preserve its original meaning in even the smallest actions. A car, a product, or a service, in the end, they are all simply tools to connect people with one another. When principles are traded away for profit, what is lost is not only customers, but the very soul of the brand itself. If today's story has made you believe more strongly in the power of integrity and in protecting core values, then click like and subscribe so that we can continue to share more journeys like this together. And before you leave the video, leave a comment with the phrase, "Keep integrity," as a reminder that every door will always remain open for those who walk in with a sincere dream.